Another denouement. The prisoners looked on with horror. The prince put himself in front of Aurora Rose between her and the fairy, but the princess was no longer paying attention. The will-o'-the-wisps, the little green, blue and red embers, had begun to bob in the air, making their way over to her. They passed practically under Maleficent's nose, and the evil fairy looked more shocked and confused than angry. Bouncing slowly in the air as if they had all the time in the world, they crossed the open space while everyone watched silently. When they finally got to Aurora Rose, they suddenly gained speed, slamming into her flesh with hot sparks. "Rose!" Philip cried. Aurora Rose began to laugh. Maleficent didn't blink. Like a snake, she showed her surprise by freezing in place. And the princess kept laughing. Not a giggle, not hysteria, not the sounds of someone who realizes she is about to die and is therefore going mad, but a genuine, full-throated laugh. "Rose?" the prince said slowly. All her memories fell silent. The dream of the Thorn Castle and her childhood in the forest cottage both faded before the realizations of the here and now. She felt alive as if for the first time. Fully awake and present, her blood sang with the desire to protect her kingdom, the will to fight for the lives of her subjects and for Philip, and the knowledge of how to do it. "I will not show clemency despite your apparent insanity," Maleficent said carefully, obviously confused by what just happened and trying to pretend she wasn't. "You will still die." "No," Aurora said. "This changes everything. And I'm not going to die." She stretched like she had just risen from a long sleep. It was a big, luxurious stretch. The magic vines and branches fell away from her like they had never been. She glowed, not like Maleficent, but with a healthy heat behind her eyes and under her skin. "My true gifts," she said. "Return to me." "Truly useless gifts," Maleficent said. "What good are grace and song and beauty, especially to a dead girl?" "Not those gifts. Those were bestowed upon me by others. These are my true, natural gifts. Intelligence, bravery, compassion. Those three you killed weren't actual fairies at all. They were parts of me. My true self, hidden from me by you, dampened, darkened, just like everything else in this wretched realm, just as I myself was hidden away from the world first in the woods, and then in a dream. Bravery, intelligence, please. You're nothing but a silly little princess," Maleficent spat. Aurora Rose couldn't have controlled her anger if she had wanted to. Maleficent suddenly flew backwards, buffeted by a mad wind that came out of nowhere, a devil of dust and air that exploded and then disappeared. The evil queen managed to keep from hitting the floor only by clawing at the throne. Her raven cawed and flapped its wings to stay upright. "I am not a silly little princess," Aurora hissed. "I am Aurora Rose, rightful queen of this kingdom, and your judge and executioner, you silly little fairy." Maleficent forced herself to stand upright, the pain of it obvious as she straightened her back. Her eyes flared. "How dare you? That's all you are. A silly little fairy grown too big for her britches. Thinks she's the big, bad, powerful sorceress because she's queen of a dream world." The stones in the floor grew. They pushed up in columns and pillars all around Maleficent and the throne, groaning and shrieking as they scratched against each other. The wall they made around the fairy looked like the teeth of a very old woman, like they would swallow her whole. It would have been a nice ending, but Aurora Rose wasn't at all surprised when, after barely a moment's silence, the granite palisade blew apart. Shards of glass-sharp rock rained on everyone in the room. Maleficent's prisoners cowered and screamed and covered their heads. One of the remaining guards took a chest full of shrapnel, crumpling to the floor. None of the shots hit Aurora Rose, though. They just avoided her. When the dust settled, Maleficent was revealed standing in a very unmaleficent pose, fists curled in anger and legs bent ready for another attack. Her teeth, the only thing about her that remained white, were bared and animal-like. Liana, behind the throne still, was picking herself up and calmly brushing herself off. "Insolent whelp!" Maleficent hissed. "It's the truth, Maleficent," Aurora said evenly. "It's not even your world. It's mine." "I still have your blood, dreamer. You may think you are in control of the world, but I control you." Maleficent shook her staff. The green liquid, the blood transformed, swirled around it in it strangely. Aurora suddenly felt sick. Her mind and stomach wobbled. All the strength and energy she had felt just a moment earlier drained out of her through her feet. like when she was getting a cold, or it was the first day of her moonblood, or... Everything seemed pointless and grey. "Rose!" Philip cried out. He put his hands on her shoulders and shook her. "Rose! She's doing it to you! It's not real!" Maleficent was grinning. She raised her staff. "For my help in these last few hours, I summoned thee with my dark powers. Golem and demon and Efrit and imp, heed my call and—" "No incantations," Aurora said weakly. A powerful wind rose and spun around Maleficent, ripping her capes and sucking her breath and words away. It might not have been quite in time. A thing appeared. It was black and half-formed, with sunken red eyes that glowed like the last embers in a dying fire. It looked around once and then charged. But instead of heading for Aurora Rose, it made it for closer prey, the residents of the castle. The poor prisoners had just begun to realize that without Maleficent's servants guarding them, they were free to escape, but were faced with gargantuan piles of rubble and stone blocking the exits, a floor that didn't exist in places, and now a giant demon thing that hungered for their blood. Servants, children, once dignified ladies and noblemen all began to run from one end of the room to the other looking for a way out. There was a lot of chaotic spinning around and screaming. Aurora started to gather her concentration again. "I'll deal with that," Philip said, interrupting. He drew his sword. "You take Maleficent." The evil queen was already taking another deep breath and gesticulating with her staff again. Aurora tried not to close her eyes. She pictured the roots she had often sat on or napped between when she lived with the fairies. Big, strong tree roots, friendly and ancient. Almost like a retort to the sickly black vines that had held her, healthy brown oak roots grew quickly through the stones of the floor and the doors and windows of the room. They even came down the chimney. Little green leaves sprouted here and there, as if they wanted very badly to become a tree. Maleficent lifted one foot and then the other, swiftly, trying to avoid being tripped up as they slipped around her. But physicality was not Maleficent's strong suit. In a matter of moments, stout brown ropes twined up her middle and began to squeeze, hardening. Little twigs crept across her face but couldn't quite make it over her mouth. A loud huff from Philip broke Aurora's concentration. She turned to look. The half-formed demon had clapped him on the side with a ridiculously large and stumpy hand, knocking his breath out, possibly cracking a rib. Philip staggered, then turned that into a stunning riposte, in which he drove his sword up into what passed for the creature's belly. While Aurora watched, distracted, Maleficent managed to finish another conjuration. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't been something out of Aurora's worst nightmares. Standing before her was a 3-legged, 2-meter-tall, attenuated and unnatural monster with 2 heads. It looked like a child's poor drawing, a joke of a demon. Except for one of the heads was her mother's, the other her father's. They wore crowns. They gibbered meaninglessly at her, their long arms swiping the air, but she could understand the words in her head. "This is how a princess behaves." "You are no queen." "I am," Aurora said, swallowing, forcing herself to look into their insane, brightly coloured eyes. "You're dead. You're not real." "It takes more than death to make a queen. We can help you. Take our wisdom and love." Aurora made wood and stone rain from the ceiling between her and the parent monster, then on the parent monster. Each time the thing was struck, it howled and their strangely familiar, distorted and pale faces contorted and pouted. "We love you. Come here. It was a mistake." They put out their long, sinuous arms. Maleficent rolled her staff, spoke to the blood, and Aurora had the faintest moment of doubt. Would it be so bad, really, to die, believing she was finally in the arms of her real parents, believing that they truly loved her? It would be the only chance she ever had. Everyone died eventually. Did it matter when? Did it matter how? She'd probably die in this battle anyway. At least she would be blissful for that last moment. The hand on her mother's side brushed her arm. Aurora reacted without thinking, a sword suddenly in her own hand and the creature's arm suddenly on the floor. Her doubt was over, the spell was broken. The evil fairy had been controlling her, causing her not to care, pulling on her overwhelming desire to be loved. But Aurora had parents already. The 3 fairies were the ones who had raised her, and Stefan and Leia were gone. Now she was queen. She had to survive and save everyone else. The parrot monster hooted and howled. "Ungrateful child! Hide behind your prince! Die, little girl!" With terrible gargling cries it bore down on her, flailing oversized hands at her head. Sick with anger, Aurora willed the rest of the ceiling to pour down. It funneled onto the parent monster like a giant whirlpool, sucking at it. The whole floor above was eaten away in their destruction. "You're sick, Maleficent," Aurora spat. Through her rage she felt the world around her again, the world that was a part of her. All of it was a weapon. Eyes closed and chanting, Maleficent ignored her. More things were appearing as she summoned them, scaly, many-footed creatures with long beaks full of teeth. They ran off, snapping and rending and ready to kill the moment they appeared. The castle dwellers crowded into the remaining corner of the throne room as Philip tried to protect them. Aurora desperately imagined all the stones in the castle, reminded them who they owed their allegiance to. Boulders and cornerstones ripped themselves from the walls and towers. The evil fairy flung out her staff. The stones stopped in midair and flew to the side, blocked by an ugly green wall of flames that curved around Maleficent, protecting her. She grinned in nasty triumph as the bones of the castle were engulfed by her fiery wall. But the light on the staff's orb was growing dimmer. The shrieks of men and women and children rose as Philip attempted to drive off the beasts that were attacking them. Aurora tried not to let her concentration falter, tried to focus on what she needed to do. Killing Maleficent was the only way to save them. One of the demon beasts rose in front of Aurora. It snapped its jagged black beak in her face. The stench of decay and rot enveloped her. Its claws raked across her chest. Sparks jumped from its talons. If she hadn't been wearing armor, it would have torn her open from rib to belly. Then she remembered. She also had a sword. She brought it up between them. The demon leapt on her anyway and knocked her to the ground. The thing tried to take out her eyes with its beak, slavering and whistling insanely as it thrashed. Its body was hot and slimy all over her, its weight crushing. Aurora tried to protect her face with the hilt of her sword. The monster's beak snapped over the blade with a terrible clang, shattering orange cartilage everywhere. Far from stopping it, the pain only drove it madder. She panicked, flailing violently. All she wanted was for it to be off her. She didn't think of magic. She didn't care what happened to Maleficent. She screamed, "Get off of her!" And the weight was gone. Philip was above her. He had the creature in his bare hands, was throttling its writhing neck, sword forgotten. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes flashing red. "Die, beast of hell!" He knelt and smashed it on the floor. Again and again and again he crushed its head against a stone. It fought its death in unnatural silence, but for the scrape of the claws against the floor. Finally it went still. "You all right?" Philip asked gruffly. Aurora nodded. "I love you," he said, and then he was away after another demon. Aurora staggered to her feet, hand on her face where blood flowed and her skin burned from the demonic creature's spittle. Maleficent was laughing. "Ah, look at the little princess who needs a prince around to save her. Can't even fight her own fights." "Needing someone once in a while doesn't make me weak, you pathetic harridan. It makes me human. Who was on your side, Maleficent?" In a fit of pettiness the princess hasn't even realized she had. A cage of roots grew out of the throne and around the fairy's raven before it could even squawk. Aurora imagined the blue fairy muttering, "Birds of a feather," and then she smiled, knowing it was something she would say. At first glance, Liana seemed to be watching this with mild interest, either waiting for a particular punishment or merely intrigued by the concept. But she was also gripping the back of the throne, her white knuckles revealing that the fight had finally stirred some sort of survival instinct in her inhuman psyche. The castle was in ruins now, most of it obliterated in the Battle of Maleficent. A strange sky glowed overhead, scraps of blue and white and rips of midnight black, complete with stars. The people in the castle howled in despair as the world literally crumbled around them. Philip wrestled with the last of the monsters. Aurora hurried it along with a wisp of thought. One of the remaining castle walls collapsed on top of it, neatly avoiding the prince. Maleficent was chanting again. "I said no incantations," Aurora repeated warily. The ground buckled beneath them, rolling and churning like the surface of the ocean in a storm. She wondered vaguely if she had ever seen an ocean in either world. She couldn't remember. Well, it was like a giant mole pushing up the dirt, that worked. The castle floor broke, a puzzle ripping apart along its edges. A single finger of stone heaved up suddenly right under the queen. Maleficent was tossed into the air unceremoniously. She landed with a surprisingly violent snap on the ground in a heap. "Better make sure." Aurora closed her eyes then. The walls of the outer keep, now visible through the ruins of the castle, flew apart like apple blossoms caught in a wind, paused for a moment, swirling over Maleficent, and then they crashed onto her body with a satisfying and delicious crack.